Definable and measurable metrics help employees know how near or far they are to that success. Furthermore, if they are not close to being successful in regards to a particular effort or initiative, metrics and clarity of business missions help guide further business decisions. Being able to view these metrics on a regular basis and in a regular manner throughout charts or through charts and dashboards will also make for a successful implementation. In this module, the objectives are to work with system charts, as well as to identify steps to creating new charts, to be able to create additional system dashboards, and also create Power BI dashboards, and finally, to work with and create goals. When it comes to working with charts, charts provide a graphical insight into an organization's most important data. In addition, they provide a visual way for users to understand and put the data into visual perspective. They also have the ability of drawing information from a specific view of any record type that's available within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 environment. They provide the ability to filter or filter down various components from those records. In addition, there are two different chart types that are available within Microsoft Dynamics 365, System and Personal. Throughout the rest of the module, we'll take a look at both of them and how you can go in and be able to manipulate existing system ones to be able to create personal ones as necessary. Within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 interface, many different charts can be created for many different types. Some examples of the chart types include column and bar charts. Column and bar charts are used for showing changes in data over a span of time or for illustrating comparisons among records, such as estimated revenue versus actual revenue. Then we also have area charts. Area charts highlight the amount of change over time and display a trend in total value. For instance, actual revenue by state. Then we also have line charts. With line charts, they display continuous data over time. These are also great for showing trends in data over a long period of time, say if you wanted to see the rise of employee wages from when you first opened until now. With pie charts show the amount of certain records in one data series proportionately to the total sum. Pie charts also make actual visual statements for something such as progress towards your goals, or a chart of cases by proprietor bar. You can tell where they copied this from. Okay. Pie charts make excellent visual statements for something such as case by priority, or chart of cases resolved within the last week. Now, some of the rest of the charts that are available may not necessarily be applicable to the service industry, but we also have funnel charts, multi-series charts, comparison charts, or a lot of times referred to as stack charts, tag charts, and also donut charts. When designing your own chart, similar to a report, there are many things to consider. The chart making progress can be divided into 4 conceptual stages. The first stage is defining the message. This is the first and most important step in chart preparation. Designers need to ask themselves, what is the purpose of this chart? Once the clear reason why the chart should exist is known, the designer can easily be able to select the correct chart type for that reason. It is equally as important to recognize that this is not always simple. To help with this, consider the following common reasons to make a chart. To compare. To compare one with values for another. For example, performance of product A versus product B in 5 regions. To show distribution. In addition, it shows the distribution of the sets of values. In other words, to understand the underliers, normal ranges, and so on. An example might be the distribution of call wait times in a call center. And also to show trends. In other words, to understand the trend over time for some specific variables. Again, an example might be customer service cases in the last year. And then there's also deviations. Deviations allow you to see which values deviate from the norm. Again, another example might be sales in various stores. Then we also have relationships. With relationship, it establishes a relationship between two or more variables. Again, an example might be relationship between in-store sales and holidays. The next, we have preparing the data. Even when the message and corresponding chart types is known, sometimes the data within the application environment may not support the analysis the chart designer is attempting to convey. If so, additional customizations or modifications to views might be required. This is also why the choice of the correct data types when doing Microsoft Dynamics 365 form customizations and design is so important. For example, if a chart designer adds a category to the chart that uses the state or province address information on all entities within Microsoft Dynamics 365 that has address information, the state or province has a data type of single text. However, though, for charts and reports, this information has no control placed on it, which means the user can enter ON or Ontario. Now, a better design would be to use an option set or create a relationship between the entity and a custom state or province entity. Next, though, we actually have preparing the chart. And although selecting the proper chart type is done early in the process, additional choices might need to be made. Again, for example, if the data set being evaluated in the chart is too large, it might be impossible to read the chart being displayed. A chart designer can limit the top or bottom number of records to display or change the chart type for each series. A more advanced option would be for the chart designer to export the chart, modify the XML, and then report it back into the system. And then the final stage that we have is formatting the chart. The formatting of charts cannot be modified through the Dynamics 365 interface. However, when exported, the XML chart can be modified to change the formatting and can include various color palettes, font sizes, and even be 2 or 3 dimensional.
All right, so now that we've talked about the different chart types as well as some considerations when creating a new chart, let's go into the system and actually take a look at some of the existing ones that we have available, as well as how to be able to create new ones as necessary. So we're back in the system, and what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our service module, and from our service module, we're going to go in and select cases. One of the things that you'll find is that when you're looking at the different views, regardless of the view that you're looking at, over on the right-hand side, you have the option of viewing existing charts based on the kind of view that you're looking at. For example, if I go under Service and I go under Queues, you'll also see I have the option of being able to view existing charts for anything related to my queues. Or if I go under Service and I go to Accounts, from here, I also see that I have the option of viewing different charts. And one of the things that you'll notice is, again, depending on the record type that you have selected, is going to depend on the available charts that you can view. So we'll go through and take a look at some of the existing ones that you have available related to cases. So again, I'm going to go to my service module using the module selector. I'm going to go ahead and just choose cases. By default, again, we're currently looking at my active cases. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over to just active cases. Now, once I have the view that I'm looking at, again, to be able to take a look at the existing charts that are available within the system, I can navigate over to the right-hand side, and I can click on the arrow which says Charts. And you'll now see that it will reduce the size of the records that I'm viewing within the view, but now allows me to take a look at some of the existing charts based on that data. So for example, you'll notice the first ones that comes up is cases by priority per owner. So it allows me to see on a user by user basis the number of what they call as far as a stacked chart, to be able to go in and see how many cases I have and then how they're broken up based on priority. Same for our demo user. Now you'll also see that if I navigate up to the top of my actual charts, I have a command bar very similar to other command bars that we've seen throughout the system. One of the first options, very similar to using our views, is I have the ability to click on that drop down arrow and take a look at all the different various charts or system charts that we have available. Now taking a look at some of them, you'll notice I have like active cases by agent. So again, it just allows me to see total number of active cases by agent. Now you'll also notice that depending on if I change my view, the data in the chart will dynamically update based on what view I'm currently reviewing. So if I have active cases by agent, and let's say I go to my active cases, again, because I'm now only looking at that user's cases, the active cases by agent is now just showing my user account or my cases, current active cases that are open, and giving me a count for that. If I go in and I select cases opened in the last 7 days, again, you'll now see that the chart will dynamically update based on what was selected or which view I'm currently reviewing at the time. Now, some of the other charts that you see that you have available is you might even go in and take a look at the case creation trend. And depending on the chart is depending on what kind of information that we're going to see. Now, not only can I go in and can I review this information, but you'll notice when I actually click on one of the data records, my mouse changes is letting me know I can drill down and look at more additional details. So if I want to see the actual records that was created on 11/23, I can take my mouse, click on that, and then you'll see that my actual view will then update, but then I can also do further analysis by choosing a different field, being able to choose how I want to look at that information, and then click OK. And you'll now see that allows me to drill down and do even further analysis. Now, not only can I drill down and look at further analysis, but to be able to go back to the original chart, you'll notice down in the lower left-hand corner, I have the ability to either just go back to the previous chart that I was looking at, or as necessary, I can return back to home. And in this case, you'll notice when I choose home, it resets my view and it goes in and resets my cases. Now, taking a look at some of the other ones that we have available, you'll notice we have case mix by origin. So if I look at the different origins, you'll notice it's a pie chart broken out by the various ways that we've received cases into our system. Or we can even do it by priority. Or if you'll notice that we scroll down, I can even go in and look at case resolution trend. And if I wanted to, I could say case resolution trend by day. And you'll notice that again, based on the criteria that we have, it's letting us know that it cannot display it based on the records that we're currently viewing. So all depending on the type of data that we have in the view and the chart that we choose is it will allow me to look at the data in various different ways. You'll even notice I can even do cases by priority per day. And now again, based on each day that is considered a separate column, I can now look at the number of high versus low versus normal cases that come in for that day. Again, if I want to filter down further, I can select that. Again, it's going to filter down my active records. I can now go through and say, I now want to look at it by owner. And now I can see, again, for that day, for the number of high cases, Lisa owns all 3 of those records. If I want to go back, you notice it allows me to go back to the original chart. And then from here, if I wanted to go through and review it any further, again, I could go through and actually click on any one of those days. And again, let's say I'm going to choose owner for this one. And I want to look at that as being a line chart, select OK. And you'll now see that again, just by going through and doing further drill down not only can I filter down my view, but I can now look at the data in even more details. So I can click on this again. So I want to look at this as being a bar chart, and I want to do this based on, let's say, customer. Again, I run this, and I can now see the number of customers that submitted those cases. Again, if I want to drill back one step, you'll see I can go back until I go all the way back to the original, or again, I can click on Home. So you'll see that we have a variety of different cases or a variety of different charts that we can look at to better analyze how we're doing as far as going through and resolving our cases. You even notice that again, we actually have case resolution trends and case resolution trends by day, as we previously discussed. One of the other nice ones that's a system chart is cases by SLA status over a week. So again, I can see the status of where we are with our SLA based on whether or not we've met that KPI. And I can see right now it's all based on progress. What's nice about this though is when I have these existing cases, not only can I go in and look at the system cases, but I can actually use this window to go in and create new cases. Now, this is not the only way that you have the ability to go in and create new cases. It is just one of the options that you have available. So for example, as I mentioned already, you'll see that we actually have a drop-down list very similar to what we have in our views over here. But I do also have several other icons. For example, you'll see I have the ability to create new cases. Or I can actually expand this. So if I want to do further analysis and look at the case or look at the chart in a much larger view, I can simply click on the expand collapse and be able to fully focus on the chart. I click on it a second time and you'll now see it collapses again, so I can view my records at the same time. So it's simply just an on-off switch to be able to view that data. From here, you'll see I also have the ability to do a save as. So if I wanted to be able to create a different chart based on the data of my active cases by agent, I have the ability to take an existing system chart to create a new personal chart. And then from here, you'll also see that if I have an existing chart that might be one that was created outside, like in a dev environment, I have the ability to import or even export charts from the same view. Now for us, if we wanted to be able to go through, and let's say that we just wanted to change this up, and let's say I want to be able to look at this as a line chart, and I want to see active cases by day. Right now, it's just giving me a count of total cases. But again, what I can do is I can click on the Save As icon, and you'll now see it pops up and asks me for a new name. Again, using the existing system chart, I can come in and I can now rename this. So let's say I want this to be called Active Cases by Day, and it's a line chart. And then from here, again, for any other user that I might share this with, I might also want to give additional details as to what information this chart is going to provide for me. Now, once I click the Save button, a couple of things are going to happen. You'll now see that that is the current chart that I have available. If I click on that drop-down arrow, you'll see that it's now letting me know it's a personal chart because it puts it under My Charts. Again, very similar to if you actually have personal views that you've created. I can see all my system charts as well as any personal charts that we have. The other important thing to make note of is that when I did the Save As function or action in my command bar, the Save As icon now changes to the Edit Chart icon. What this is now letting me know is I have the ability to modify this chart as necessary. And when I click on that chart icon, it will actually now go through and open up the Chart Designer tool. All right, so once we're in the Chart Designer, you'll notice now a couple of things I can do. Within the Chart Designer, I have the ability to, if I want to give it a different name, I can rename it from here. And then it gives me a preview of what that chart is going to look like. So now this is when we get in, we start talking about the chart designer. And you'll see a couple of the options that I can go in and can I look at. I can actually decide as far as if I want to look at the legend. So right now it's counting all of my current cases. And horizontally, it's tracking it by owner. But if I wanted to, you'll notice that next to, if I wanted to now do it instead of by case, let's say I wanted to do it and count it by owner. And you'll notice that I can now change that function. So whether or not I want to find the average or the min or the max, well, that will change depending on the data type that you select. So for example, let's say I change that to created on. And again, you'll see it will just simply do it off of the count. So you have the ability of going through and actually making changes as to the legend of information that you're looking at, and then how you want to calculate the values, again, based on the data type. The other two options that you have is you have the ability to change the type of chart. So as we talked about the various types of charts that you have, so whether it's a column or a stacked column. We even discuss as far as the bar versus the stacked bar. And of course, areas, our line chart, our pie chart, or even a funnel. So again, when you look at the funnel, it's all just depending on what, how, and what information you want to look at. So the other option that you have is also, if I want to be able to go through and pull in just the top 3 or the top 5, or even do a custom saying, I just want to look at the top 10. So you'll see that if I wanted to, I could go through and say, just show me the top 10. And again, it would allow me to go through and filter down that information. Or I could clear those rules. So let's say, for example, that on this particular one, I actually want this to be a line chart. And so when I do this, as far as telling it that I want to look at the line chart, you'll see that I have the option and I can now, again, look at the count of cases. But now one of the things I might want to do is my categories, instead of doing it by actual owner, I might want to do it based on created on date. And then when I change it on the created on date, you now see it summarizing it by month. But let's say I want to do that by day. So from here, I can now change that. And again, I could either do it by week, or probably a little bit more relative one is we might want to do it by day. And if I wanted to, I could even come in here and I could tell it to add another category. So I might now want to have owner. And now you'll see that as I add my owners in here, I can see the difference between my CRM user and myself as to the active cases by day. If I decide for whatever reason that I don't need to have the owner in it, it makes it a little bit more confusing. Again, I could click on the X to remove that particular axis label. Or again, if I want to add another series, you'll notice that again from here, I can add various series so that I can look at the information, whether I'm counting again, or I am setting up a different category. And then for each one of those, I can change that as necessary. And then you'll also see as below, I can update that to have a little bit better description. So let's say I do want to add my owner in here. So I can now look at the axis, and I can look at the more detailed information for my horizontal axis label, as well as my legends. And then what's nice about this is that once we have this done, you'll see that I have the ability to either save the chart, do a save as, or as we discussed previously, I could go in here and actually expand this. So if I want to see it in more details and kind of focus on building the chart, or again, I could go back and I could collapse it. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. So now that I have that chart saved, I can use that at any time as far as if I want to go in and take a look at building dashboards. This can now be a chart that I have available for the dashboards. And I can even go through and be able to create data off of even advanced find features or personal views as necessary. Now again, right now, let's say if I go and I select my high priority active cases. So you'll see that even off of a saved personal view, I can build my charts off of those views that are available to me within that record type as necessary. So that I've gone through and I've reviewed this and I've validated my information. Now what I can do is I have the ability to save this information, and then once that chart is saved, it is now available that I can go in and I can look at any time. So as I switch back and forth, it is now considered a regular chart. From here, if I want to edit it, you'll notice my chart designer will be available. And then from here as well, I have the ability that if I want to delete it, I can assign it to another user as necessary. I can share it so that other users can use the same chart. Or as we discussed as well, I have the ability to import or export the charts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is not the only way that you can create charts, but by using this method, it allows you to create personal charts. If you want to be able to have the ability to create system charts so that any user can now use this when they're analyzing the data, then you also have the option of going under settings, and from settings, you can go to customizations. And if we go to customize the system, and I go to and I look at the actual different information from here, you'll see I can expand on my entities. So let's say I want to go down to my case and I expand on cases, and then you'll see I have an option there for charts. And when I click on the charts, you'll see here are all of those system charts that we just take a look at. So now I have the ability to modify those, or as you see in the command bar, we also have various actions that we could take, such as, again, editing the existing ones or even creating new system charts. So it really just depends on the type of charts that the user's requesting. Now you might find that it might be a lot easier to create a personal chart and then assign that to another user to allow them to access it. It's just a matter of who needs the information, how they need to look at the information, and be able to prepare and format the chart so it's in a nice readable format. Then again, from here, once I'm done with this, I can now better analyze this information and have it available so that anytime I want to look at what the progress is, it is available from my charts view. And as a reminder, it updates all based on the views that we are currently looking at. So working with charts can be something that can be very easy, again, when you're wanting to deal with personal charts, or if you're wanting to make system-wide changes by using the settings, customizations, going to the entity where the charts exist, and then modifying those. Of course, you always want to be careful when you're talking about modifying system charts, as they will have an impact on everybody as the changes are being made. Whereas with your personal charts, they are always just going to be available to you. And again, as you saw, when I created this personal chart, I have the ability to delete that at any time without that impacting anyone else at this point. So again, working with the charts can be very easy. Just takes a matter of understanding the data and how you want to represent or present that data to either yourself or other users.
Dashboards are a powerful feature within Microsoft Dynamics 365 that presents a personalized page with a virtual unlimited variety of visualizations of important service information like lists, charts, or data from any record type. In addition to viewing information, you can also use dashboards to interact with the underlying records. So dashboards allow users to see at a glance all of the most important information needed to make key decisions and can be used to compare and analyze various pieces of customer information to give users data snapshots. When creating a new dashboard, the layout is based on a choice of templates. However, all dashboards contain a specialized group of components in which you can use to create and customize your dashboard, such as charts, lists, web resources such as pictures, links, or other items, as well as iframes, which is basically a box displaying an external web page. Just like with views and charts, there are personal and system dashboards. Personal dashboards are only allowed to be seen by the user who created it, but they do have the ability to share it with whomever they choose. There are also a number of pre-configured system dashboards for each entity available to shed light on the most important information. Now, to shed light on the most important information, let's take a look at what some of those dashboards are. One of the pre-configured dashboards is called a Customer Service Manager dashboard. This dashboard empowers service managers to keep tabs on what's happening within the entire service organization. Another dashboard, the Customer Service Operations dashboard, empowers operational managers to keep tabs on what's happening with the overall process of customer service to ensure it's running efficiently. Now, another dashboard that's available by default is called a Customer Service Performance dashboard. And you'll find that within Microsoft Dynamics 365, there are two versions, the original version and the new version. The Customer Service Performance dashboard not only shows individual customer service representatives how they're doing, but also shows them how they're doing relative to specific and defined goals. Now, the Customer Service Representative dashboard is very similar to the Customer Service Performance dashboard. However, most of the elements within the Customer Service Representative dashboard are listed. And then finally, there's the Customer Service Representative Social dashboard. And just like with the Customer Service Performance dashboard, the social dashboard has both an original version and a new version. Now that we know what service dashboards are available within the system, let's actually go into the system and see how we can interact with them. Power BI dashboards provide you with a 360-degree view of your business with real-time dashboards connected to your most important business data. They can connect with many diverse data sources such as Excel, the Power BI desktop files, CSV files, OneDrive files, whether it's OneDrive for business or for personal. Now, you may ask yourself, why would I create a Power BI dashboard, which is located outside of Dynamics 365, when I can just create a new dashboard directly within the user interface? Well, even though Microsoft Dynamics 365 provides you with the ability to create multiple types of dashboards, including streaming dashboards for the service entity, it still does not quite stack up to the full capacity of what Power BI offers. Regular dashboards within the environment provide you with the ability to add web resources, iframes, charts, and lists on a limited number of layouts. And while the interactive dashboards allow you to add tiles, you still may only be able to filter by one entity, such as cases or accounts. For example, when you create a new dashboard in Power BI, you can add all multiple visualizations one by one and place them wherever you choose. There's already a large variety of visualizations to pick from, but you can also import custom ones from other external sources. Similar to the dashboards that we just talked about, you can grow or shrink them in size depending on whether or not you think certain information is important more than other data. But with the Power BI dashboards, there's no limit to how much specific visualizations can be shrunk or enlarged, as long as it fits on a single sheet. You're not limited to a specific amount of space, and comparable to Microsoft Excel, you can have pages upon pages of data as necessary.
Let's look further into the available system dashboards for the customer service module. And let's see how they combine the most important necessary information all within one location, as well as how to create our own personal dashboards as well. So back within the system, again, being able to look at dashboards, we can be able to look at available dashboards that we have based on our user role by going to the module selector clicking on Service, and then from the My Work section, clicking on Dashboards. When we choose dashboards, again, which dashboards we have available to us is all going to be based on what security roles have been assigned to our user accounts. And then from there, you'll see that we have a multitude of dashboards that we can select, very similar to when working with views. We can click the drop-down arrow and it will show us all of the available service dashboards as well as any personal dashboards that we may have created. And again, the dashboards that I can see and I can review are all based on the security roles that have been assigned to my user account. So you'll see that not only do I have access to some out of the box customer service dashboards, but I also have some marketing dashboards, even as far as some system dashboards and sales related dashboards. Again though, reviewing some of the existing system service dashboards that we have available, by default, you'll notice the one that shows up when we go to our dashboards page is the social dashboard. As we mentioned previously, we actually have not only the social dashboard, but the original version as well. So we have the original one and then we have the new one. Again, set up available for backwards compatibility. And in looking at this dashboard, you'll notice that we have several charts that we have available, and then we have one list, and that list being my activities. You'll also see that we have our personal wall of any activities that we have been working with or any type of transactions that we've been managing. We can see everything related to what's been done on our personal wall. Now, going through and taking a look at some of the other ones, you'll notice that you also have just the customer service dashboard. Now, on this one, you'll see that some of the charts that we have case mixes by origins. In other words, how did it get received into our system? By priority, low, normal, and high, by day, and then even our case resolution trends. And even from here, again, as a customer service representative, I could even go in and track my goals and how I'm progressing towards my goals. And then of course, I can see if I have any open and all my open activities that I can manage as well. And just kind of go through and look at some of the other ones that you'll see. If I look at my performance dashboard, again, some of the charts that we have on here can be very similar. You'll notice though, some other ones that we've included on this one are cases by SLA status over the week, case mix by priority, active cases by agents, so I can see how many cases each agent is actually currently working. And then of course we also have it by incident type, case creation trends to see how many cases are created on a regular basis, as well as case resolution trends. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is that when we're looking at these charts, very similar to when we talked about charts in a prior lesson, that when I actually go into one of these charts and I hover over it, that I can drill down and I can look at additional details, just like we can do when we're dealing with our charts. So if I want to go through and let's say I want to drill down and I want to be able to, let's say for example, look at the actual origin on this. And then again, I want to be able to look at it using a different chart type. I can click on the chart, I can click on execute, and I can now drill down and go back to how each one of those 20 cases are broken out by origin. And then of course, I could go back to the original case itself. You'll also notice that within each case, as I go into the case itself, I also have a small command bar that's available to me. So from here, if I just want to refresh that current chart, I have a refresh icon. I also have the ability to go in and pop out the records and view the underlying records that make up that chart. So you'll notice that when I click on the pop-out icon, I can now see the list, which are my active cases that make it up, and then I also have a chart view. So again, as we discussed previously with those charts, I can hide them and focus on the records, or I can look at the charts. And then you'll even see as far as within that pop-out view that I have the ability to have the command bar that I have when I'm looking at views within the system. Now, the other thing that you can do is, again, by looking at each one of these charts, that if I want to be able to focus on the chart, so say, for example, I want to focus on my case creation trend. I also have the ability to enlarge the chart. So again, it can be the primary focus of what I'm working on. And once I enlarge the chart, as we discussed with the other charts, I can still drill down and review additional details that we need regarding the information. So again, I might do this based on origin. I execute it so that I can now see as far as additional information, so that I can now just have the focus of that chart. And then once I'm done, I can click on the X to return back to the dashboard itself. And then the same is true. So if we go in and we're going to look at, let's say we look at our customer service manager dashboard. When I go look at my customer service manager dashboard, again, you'll see some of the charts that we've seen in some of the other dashboards, such as um, active cases by agent, cases by SLA status over the week, my personal wall that we have. But then you'll also see some of the other options that we have as cases by queues. In other words, how many cases are in the various queues. And then again, if I want to look at additional details behind that, I can click on the drill down. I can pop out the records to be able to view. And then from here, if I want to do additional analysis, I can go through, I can filter on my queues, I can export that data to Excel, I can do whatever I need to do at this point. And then of course we have case mix by priority, and then we even have to be able to look at current entitlements or case service contracts, and who currently has those service contracts and how many entitlements do they have left. So going through and looking at these, we're going to actually go back and let's take a look at, let's go back to just our customer service representative dashboard. And again, we've taken a look at the different cases, but then we also have the various lists or various views. So you'll see as far as with this view that if I want to search for certain records, I have the ability to go through. I can type in search. So again, if I'm looking something related to my system issues, I can search on that and then be able to see those activities that align with my search results. You'll also notice that as soon as I clicked on that search field, that again, my command bar has now changed based on the current component that I'm viewing. So I can again export activities, I can run certain reports related to my activities, I can view the chart pane, again, based on my activities as necessary, or I can even open the associated grid. So again, I can have my focus just on that actual view itself. And then of course, like any other view, if I want to drill down and look at the record itself, I can click on the link, and that in turn will now open up that activity record for me, and I can now view the underlying activity. And then once I'm done viewing that activity, I can close out of there, which will then take me back to the dashboard. So again, I can have all of the priority or important necessary information that I need to be able to manage my day-to-day tasks, cases, queues, even goals, all within a single location. So as far as going through and again, taking a look at some of the ones that we have, you'll see that there's a variety of system dashboards that are available out of the box with the Dynamics 365 environment. But some of the other options that you have, and as we've discussed at the very beginning of this lesson, is not only can I go in and can I use the system dashboards, but I have the ability to be able to create new personal dashboards. So from here, if I have an existing dashboard that I want to be able to build off of, I could use the Save As action in my command bar and be able to take this existing dashboard, make modifications to it, and create a new personal dashboard from it. Or if I'd rather, I also have the ability of being able to create a new Dynamics 365 dashboard. We're going to go ahead and we're going to walk through those steps of what it means to be able to create a new Dynamics 365 dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on New, and you'll notice the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask me, how do I want this dashboard to look? What kind of layout do I want? And you'll notice that I have a variety of different types of layouts that I can use. I can have 2 columns, 4 columns, 3 columns overview, 3 columns focused, or just regular. And of course, we have multi-focus, and then we have overviews. So let's say I choose my 3-column focus dashboard. So once I select my layout, I can then click on Create. When I click on Create, you'll notice the first thing, and in fact the only required field that I have, is to give this new dashboard a name. So let's say that even though there's an existing customer service manager dashboard, I want to be able to have a couple of other key KPIs that I want to be able to monitor. So I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call this one Service Manager Snapshot. And then with this snapshot, you'll see that within the actual dashboard, I now have placeholders to include the various components that are supported with our dashboards in Dynamics 365. Some of the main components that you can include within a dashboard is the ability to be able to have charts, to be able to insert lists of various views for different record types, even to be include iframes. So there's a website reference that you want to be able to include on your dashboard. You can actually include web pages or even web resources, such as what we discussed already, dealing with our personal wall. So going through, you'll also notice that in our command bar, when we create a new dashboard, we also have various actions that we have available. And as with other record types and other views that we have within the Dynamics 365 environment, the actions that we have available will vary depending on where we are and what we're doing with the current component. So you'll notice that I have those same components that we discussed, being the chart, the list, the web resource, and the iframe. So whether I choose to click on the action in the command bar or I choose to click on the icon within each placeholder, it'll do the same thing. So if I want to go through and I want to be able to create, say for example, a new chart, you'll notice that when I'm selecting my charts, there's 3 required components. I need to be able to specify the record type. So if we're talking about let's say for example, we want to include all my active cases by agent. So my record type is going to be my case. The view is going to be what's the default view that's going to be used to create that chart. And then of course, I can choose the various charts that I want to use, and including not only my system charts, but also my personal charts. So let's say I'm actually going to do active cases by day. So that again, you'll now see I can do it by user, by day. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add that chart. Once I add that chart, let's say that I'm going to also do a list this time. And I want to be able to see just all the active cases as a list. So next to that chart, again, I'm going to go to the second placeholder and click on Insert List. And you'll see that when I tell it to insert a list, I still have to choose a record type, and then I can also go through and I can choose my views. So again, if I want to look at all of the current active cases that are out there, I can choose my record type of being cases. And then under the view, again, I can decide which cases I want to look at. Do I want to look at the high priority active cases, all active cases? And again, if this is going to be a personal view, or if you're building a personal dashboard, or if you're building this dashboard for somebody else, that's again where we can decide what view we want to build it off of. So this particular one, I am going to choose active cases. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that when I add charts to my dashboard, I can actually see what that chart will look like when we execute and we refresh the dashboard itself. But you'll notice that when it comes to working with the views, is it just shows almost as a placeholder. It does not allow me to see what the results are until I save, close, and refresh the actual dashboard. So I'm going through and doing so. We're going to do a couple more items on this one. Let's say one of the other ones I want to be able to include is I want to be able to include queue items and cases that are currently available to work on. So you'll notice this time, you'll see I don't have to limit this to just being cases. I can choose any of the existing record types that I have available within my Dynamics 365 environment. So let's say I might want to go down to my queue items, and then from the queue items, the view I might want to see are cases available to work on. And then again, you'll see the charts I have available are cases by queue. So I'm going to add that one. And then the last one I want to be able to look at is, let's say I want to be able to look at a list of all of our current SLAs or service level agreements, and to see whether or not the cases that we are working on currently are considered to be compliant or non-compliant or nearing compliancy. So one of the things I can do is, you'll notice, again, I can tell it to insert the list. And in my record types, one of the options that I have is under my SLAs. If I scroll down, you'll see I have my SLA KPI instances. And then again, you'll see that not only do I actually have my KPI instances and I have different views, but I also can have personal views. So you'll notice that from here, I actually have a view that shows my non-compliant resolved by SLA instance. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add that personal view as well. And just to kind of give you an idea about what that would look like, looking at my advanced find, I'm going to look at the existing saved views that I have, and in the process, again, to kind of show you what that personal view looked like, I can go down to my SLA KPI instance, and you'll see here is the actual personal view that I created. And essentially what that is basically taking, because we have our default enhanced SLAs enabled, I more or less am telling it that I only want to see where the status is either non-compliant or nearing non-compliant, and where the name is resolved by. So to show you what the results would look like when I run this, you'll now see that I pulled in the case title, the case number, the name of course, the status, the warning time, the failure time, and then succeeded on. And let's say that I'm also going to add, in fact, we're going to modify this a little bit, and let's say I also want to see who the owner is. In other words, I want to see who is managing the cases that have gone non-compliant. So even from here, you'll notice that, again, kind of doing a quick review of using the advanced find feature, I can change my record type to the underline regarding, and I can add my owner field. And then again, I can choose where I want that to appear. So select OK, I run my results, and I can now see the information. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. So by default, again, not only can you use system views, but you can even go in by just using advanced find feature and creating personal views. I can use those within my dashboards. Now, one of the other options that we're also going to do is, not only do I have a couple of views and a couple of charts that I have, but I also want to be able to take a look at the web resources. Now, if you remember, when we looked at some of the system dashboards that are available, one of the options is to be able to have my personal wall. Well, to be able to use a personal wall, that's where you can actually use web resources. Web resources can be where you either want to pull in a form, whether it might be from another part of the Dynamics 365 environment, or maybe a web page that might be from another external application that you want to use. Now, we're not going to go into depth about how to be able to go in and create new web resources, but to kind of show you, as far as an example, what a web resource would look like, there are standard web resources within the Dynamics 365 environment already. So you'll notice that you can have bitmaps, so if you want to have logos, you can have GIFs, or you can even have HTML pages. So in going through and taking a look at this, again, to kind of give you an idea, I might want to look at, let's say, the activity feeds component of what's going on as far as with my user profile content. Or, as we discussed, I want to see my personal wall. Let's see if we can do it this way. Let's try doing a better search. There we go. So now you'll see that again, all that is a web page, but it's an existing HTML page that I can now reference within my dashboard. So when I add that, I can actually have it configured. If I want to have a field name in properties, I can, let's say, have a label, and we'll call this one what's new. And I can choose whether or not I want to see the label on the dashboard, whether I want it to be visible, and then there's some additional configurations and parameters that you can have this configured to be able to pass through onto that dashboard page. So once I set that up and I select OK, once we actually load this, you'll now see it will show my personal wall. Again, the only other one that we didn't really talk about is the ability to do the iframe. An iframe might be a good example where you want to be able to take an existing CRM report and you want that to be available on your dashboard. Well, again, depending on how that report was written, if it was written in the SSRS environment, you can actually be able to pull the URL from the SSRS report and be able to set it up as an iframe within your dashboard as well. So just going through and let's see what this looks like now that we have this set up and configured. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this new dashboard. And once I save the dashboard, I'm going to go ahead and click on Close. Now, once I click on Close, we have the ability of going through and actually seeing what that dashboard will look like. All right. So again, once it's actually closed and we save it, you'll now see that it will show us what our dashboard will look like. And you'll notice that a couple things we look at when we have as far as our personal wall, you'll see that it has any type of transactions that we have been involved with. Not only that, but it might seem a little redundant as far as having the what's new, so that might be where we change the label. But then you'll also see that we have our active cases by day with our line chart, our active cases so that we can see all of our current active cases. And then of course, if I also scroll down, I can see how many cases are within each individual queue as necessary. And I also have the ability of being able to look at my non-compliant resolved by as service level agreements. And I can now see additional details on that. So right from here, I have a very quick, easy ability of looking at all the important information that I need to see within a single dashboard. Now, a couple of things also that you'll notice that, let's say, for example, we do want to make some configuration changes to this. So what we can do is if we want to go back and we want to make modifications to this, we can do so by going through, and you'll notice, again, depending on where I am and what I'm doing, my command bar changes. So you'll notice that if I happen to be on my active list or I clicked on the active list, the command bar that I have available is based on that list. But if I go back and I click on one of the charts, you'll now see that my command bar changes to allow me to continue to manage or make adjustments to the entire dashboard. So if I want to go through and I want to edit my dashboard, you'll see I have an action here to click on edit, and I can click on the edit action. And a couple of things that let's say we want to make some changes. So the first thing that we may have noticed is that when we actually reviewed what the dashboard looks like, is we had some redundancies on the actual label of my wall and then the name of the wall. So you can go through and you can make modifications to the different components by simply doing one of two things. Again, you have a command within the command bar where you can edit the component, or if you just take your mouse and double click in the actual title of that component, it also pulls up the properties for that component that you're working with. So on here, all I would have to do is tell it that I do not need to necessarily see the label for that web component. Or again, let's say if I needed to test it and there are some additional parameters that I need to include on here. This is again where I could easily go through and update that information. Some of the other things that you can also do when you look at the various components. So if I go to my chart and I double click on the actual chart, is you'll see that again, if I want, I can actually have a label for the dashboard. But more importantly, some of the other options that I have is I can actually go through and I can choose the data sources. So again, by default, when we're looking at the actual cases by day, by user, again, the default view is active cases. But let's say I want to be able to go in and do another view, such as my high priority active cases. Or again, I might want to do it for all cases or my active cases. So we can change which view that we want to use and that we selected during the initial configuration. I can also, if I want to, enable the ability to be able to switch views as necessary. So I can tell it to enable the view selector so that the chart will change depending on which views that we're looking at. And I can tell it that I can have them where they can look at all views, or if I want to, I can also go in and choose selected views. So this would be a great example where we know based on how we developed and we created that chart that some of these views are not going to provide pertinent information. So I might want to have active cases, and if I use my control key, I can select active cases open in the last 7 days, active cases with child parent status, maybe cases I follow, of course, my active cases, and then let's say I also want to be able to have my high priority cases. And then again, by default, which chart type I want to have selected allows me to go through and select the chart. But I can also tell it that I want to change that. So again, I can give whether myself or if I'm creating this for another user, provide more flexibility of being able to go through and select the different charts as necessary. And then of course, we can tell it if we want to have this available when we publish it on various platforms, such as on the phone or on the tablets. So I select OK. And then again, I can do the same thing even with my views. So with my views, again, taking a look at this, you'll see that by default, it does automatically set up the search box and allow me to index this, and also allows it to show all views. But from here, I could go through and I can specify that to saying, no, I don't want to see all views. I just, again, want to see and allow them to look at specific views. So I can use my control key and select the views I want to be able to see. And then as we talked about, you'll notice that I can tell it to include the chart. So when we have this pop out of the list, this will be the default chart that's selected. But let's say I want it to be case mix by origin, or better yet, case mix by priority. So when I go in and I make these changes, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. And again, I'm going to close this so we can see what the results look like. So you'll see now that I've made those changes, again, my label for my what's new has disappeared. And then more importantly, when I look at my case, you'll now see I have a second drop-down selector. And I can click on that drop-down, and now you'll see that I can choose the different views. And as I now choose the different views, you'll now see that my chart dynamically updates based on the view that I have selected. So again, you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to building your dashboards. You'll see I could do the same thing for my view. So again, I can now choose which views I want to be able to look at. So I can look at active cases open in the last 7 days. And not only that, but also, as we talked about previously, I have the ability to pop out and look at all the records associated to that view. And when I do the pop out from here, that this is also where you'll see I have my search functionality, but more importantly, I have my charts. And when I have my charts, this is again where I can now tell it which chart I want to be able to go through and I want to be able to look at. So those are some of the options that you have when making those adjustments to your personal dashboards. Now, a couple of the other things just to take a look at when it comes to working with your actual personal dashboards is, as we've talked about already, we have the ability to edit some of the existing items. So again, when I click on edit, let's say I wanted to add some more. So let's say I wanted to add another list to this item. So from here, I could click on list. And let's say I want to deal with this with my knowledge base articles. And I want to see all of the knowledge base articles, the draft articles Anita reviewed, because again, I'm the one responsible for reviewing them. So you'll see that I can actually add, so even though I have a standard layout, I can add additional views. I can add additional charts as necessary. And let's say I'm going to add one more view. And I want to be able to include my activities as well. And let's say I just want to look at my scheduled activities. So I can add that. Now, you'll notice that when I added that, it actually included that list below the one above. And it's like, well, no, I actually want to sit next to that. So you'll see that I do have the ability of being able to click and drag and rearrange these items so that they're in a little bit more of a preferable location. Let's see if we can get this. And a lot of times, depending on your display settings, it can be a little temperamental to get it to click and drag and move around. But you'll see that as you click and drag, it will actually give you a visual indicator to let you know where it's actually going to be placing that particular field. Now, not only do I have the ability of making those modifications, but same thing, if there's an additional item that I don't want, I can simply highlight that component, click on remove, and it will then remove it from that list. And as we've discussed already, once I've made changes to it, I can choose save and close and be able to actually close out of that particular dashboard. Now, a couple of the other things I can also do is not only do I have the ability of being able to edit the existing dashboard, but let's say that as I'm looking at this, I'm like, you know what, I don't really find this dashboard to be necessary anymore. So because it is a personal dashboard, I have the ability of deleting this dashboard right from here. Now again, do we want to delete it? Maybe not. It might be something that we don't need it, or it may be something that we just don't want to use it. We might want to disable it. So again, being careful as far as making the decision of whether or not we want to have this as being a system dashboard or being a personal dashboard is something to take in consideration as well. And not only do I have the ability to delete my personal dashboard using my command bar, but you'll also see I have the ability to share it as well as assign it. So in this case, where I'm actually using a couple of personal views that I've created using my advanced find, if I go through and I tell it to share the dashboard, so let's say I want to be able to share this dashboard with another one of my CRM or my Dynamics 365 users. You'll see I can select the user that I want to share it with, and then from here I can assign the appropriate permissions as necessary. Now, what you have to take in consideration is that when you share the dashboard to another user, we need to make sure that any of the underlying views or charts or information, that they also have access to that information. So if we take a look at, again, some of these ones, like for example, I have a personal view for high priority active cases. So if that user does not have access to that underlying view, you also have to go through and make sure to give the appropriate permissions for that as well. So in this case, I have two personal views that I'm using. So what I want to be able to do is, this is where I can go to my advanced find tool. From my advanced find tool, I can do my saved views. I can choose the record type. In this case, we're going to go down to cases. And then I can select the appropriate case. And then from here, I want to click on share. And just like what we did with the dashboard, I can choose the appropriate user that I want to share the view with and give it the appropriate permissions. Then from here, I'm going to share that. And then as we talked about, the other one I have as well, that's part of my dashboard, is my SLA KPI instance. So again, I can also mark that personal view, and then I'm going to share that with the other user account that we have in the system as well. And then once I'm done, now when he goes in and he actually runs this dashboard, he'll see that he has a new personal dashboard that resides as well, and he can run it. And usually if we forgot to assign the appropriate permissions or gave them the appropriate access to the underlying views, it's very obvious when they look at the dashboard because it's going to be blank. And it's going to let them know there's no records on there and they can't see the records because they've not been assigned the appropriate permissions. So not only can we actually go through and can we share our dashboards that we have, but we also can assign them. So this might be a great example where if I'm a customizer, or let's say the system admin, and someone had asked me to be able to go in and create a dashboard for them. Well, it's not going to be the dashboard I'm going to use. I want to be able to make sure that it's going to be their personal dashboard. So that's the example where I can use the assign functionality. I can tell it to assign it to another user or team. And then again, I can come in, I can select the appropriate user, and I can assign it to them as necessary. And just as we talked about before, when I assign it to them, it'll now be their personal dashboard that's going to be available as well. So not only do you have the ability of going through and again working with the personal dashboards to be able to have all the pertinent information that you work with on an ongoing regular basis within the Dynamics 365 environment, but also we also have the ability of going through and again to take a look at the system dashboards. Now, we're not going to go into detail in this exercise of looking at how to modify or make changes to system dashboards, but just to show you that under the customize, so we go to settings, customizations, when I click on dashboards, you'll see that this is where we have all of the system dashboards that are available. And again, these can be modified. But as we talked about, we want to be careful about making modifications to the system dashboards because it's not going to affect just a single user. It will affect anybody who needs to access that information. But again, the nice thing about working with your system dashboards or with your personal dashboards and system dashboards is I can now have everything that I need to be able to work on with a single location. And so it makes working with and managing your data that much easier by using and working with the dashboards. So now that we've talked about some of the features and functionalities of the Power BI tool, go ahead and take a look and see how it actually works with the Dynamics 365 environment. Now, as we mentioned previously, Power BI does not run within the Dynamics 365 environment. We can actually take a look at as far as how it functions by opening up a new web browser page. And then from there, we can go to www.powerbi.com. Now, from that page, you'll see that you have a variety of different resources that you can utilize. You'll see as far as under the Learn, they have guided learning sections, documentation, support, even webinars that are available. But more importantly, to be able to go in and be able to access and set up Power BI to be able to access our Dynamics 365 environment, this is where we want to click on Sign In. Or if you have not registered already, this is also where you can sign up for a free account. So once we go through and we click on Sign In, we will be validated with our Office 365 environment. Now, because I'm already logged into the Dynamics 365 environment, which incorporates part of our Office 365 environment, automatically you'll see that it did the pass-through authentication and logged me in to my Power BI configurations and environment. From here, as soon as you log in, you'll see that you actually have a workspace configuration environment set up. You also have several actions that you can perform right up within the title bar, such as if you have notifications. In other words, if other users have published other reports and shared them with you, you'll be able to see those notifications as well as receive emails. There are standard settings that you can go through and configure. You even have the ability to download certain reports and be able to further analyze that into a variety of different tools. And then, of course, you also have the ability to go through and look at help support, provide feedback, and have access to your user information. You also see on the left-hand side that we have a navigation pane. If I click on the navigation pane to be able to show it, it's a show hide feature. You'll see that essentially there are several main components that make up your Power BI environment. You have your workspace, a global search tool, available dashboards, reports, and data sets. Now, as part of this, when you're going through and you're configuring Power BI to be able to connect to your data, before we go in and we take a look at any of the existing dashboards, reports, or data sets, we're going to walk through the steps of what we can do to be able to get existing data from a multitude of environments. Now, out of the box, Microsoft does provide a content-packed library of existing dashboards and reports that you can use for the Dynamics 365 environment. To be able to access that information, that is where we can click on the Get Data link, and you'll see that it will then give us an option of connecting or using a content-packed library or importing or connecting to another resource. So if we want to be able to go through and be able to connect to online services such as our Dynamics 365 environment, you'll see that we could use services. Or if other users have created a content-packed library regarding other environments that we want to be able to connect to, we also have that option. Or, as we've discussed previously, we can bring in data from other reports, workbooks such as Excel, or even the OneDrive, or even CSV files as necessary. And you can even connect to live data by using the Azure SQL database configurations. So for this example, we're going to go and we're going to walk through the steps of how to be able to connect to one of the online services that's available to us. So if we click on the Get link under Services, you'll see it will pull up a list of all the available applications that provide a content-packed link to Power BI. Now, again, we can scroll through and we can take a look at some of the available ones from the various vendors to be able to see what we have available for the Dynamics 365 environment. You'll see that I can, in the search window, I can simply just type in Dynamics. And from here, you'll now see that we have a variety of content packs for Dynamics 365, including Dynamics 365 for financials, regarding as far as sales opportunities, Dynamics 365 financials for sales, and then you'll also see that we have for the other ERP systems such as Dynamics AX and the various components of the Dynamics AX environment, as well as even Nav and the Dynamics Marketing. The two that we're going to focus on for right now, and even though it says the Dynamics CRM Online Sales Manager and Service Manager, these are still compatible with the Dynamics 365 environment. So if we wanted to be able to go through and connect and be able to look at the content library available for a Service Manager, again, this is where I can simply select it and click on the Get link. And when I click on the Get link, to be able to configure this, what we can do is it just needs to have the URL or the URL of our current online environment. So I could, as necessary, go to the path of my Dynamics 365 configuration environment and paste it in. Click on Next. Once I click on Next, it does a validation to make sure that the path is correct. And then once it validates that the path is correct, the next step that we can do is we can choose what kind of authentication method. So we might want to be able to go in and choose the O authority, in other words, the Office 365 authorization option. And then from here, I could click on Sign In and it does a validation. Now, because we already have it configured in our current environment, we're not going to walk through all the steps. We're going to go ahead and cancel here. But that's basically what we have to do to be able to go in and have it set up and configured to be able to connect to the content packs for Dynamics 365. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cancel out of here. And again, once it's loaded, you will know it's loaded because you will see by default the dashboards that come available. So in our current environment, you'll see that not only do I actually have the content library pack for our service management environment, but I also have it available for my sales management environment. So if I go to dashboards and I click on the CRM Online Service Manager dashboards, you'll see that it's a little bit different than what we had for our service dashboards, in that not only do we actually have lists available to us and charts like we saw in our standard service dashboards, but we can actually have different types of tiles, such as cards, and it just gives us set numbers. But you'll see that even when I hover over that, I still have the ability to drill down and get additional information. So I can scroll through and I can look at some of the existing tiles I have available on my dashboard. So I can look at not only as far as total active cases, how many incoming cases we've had within the last 7 days, how many resolved cases we had in the last 7 days, and then how many active cases that we've had in the last 30 days, total number of activities, and even our CSAT scores. And then I have multiple charts, like I have a waterfall chart that I'll be able to look at total resolved cases by resolved date, and then including my totals, and then even incoming cases by created date. I can even have a pre-configured chart that shows me if I have service level agreements and what the percentage of the service level agreements are being successful or have been met, again, based on a date format. You'll even see that, again, as we talked about, we have a variety of different tiles other than just charts and lists. We even have mapping functionality so that we can look at cases by location as necessary. And then again, as I continue to scroll down, you'll see that we can even have leadership type of charts that shows top owners by active cases by type, and again, even leaders by SLA or service level agreement percentages, KPIs being met. Now, again, one of the nice things about when you're working with the dashboards is that you do have the ability with the visualizations to resize these as necessary. I can click and drag. I can rearrange these as I need to. If there's anything that I want to be able to resize, I can come in and you'll see that as I click and drag, it gives me a footprint to show where and how it's going to look. So as I continue to click and drag, you'll see that it will default to standard footprints, but now as I click and drag and I rearrange these objects, so let's take this and we're going to rearrange this first, make it a little bit smaller. And to rearrange them, you'll notice that I can take my mouse and move it into the lower right-hand corner and then click and drag and follow the resizing template so that it will snap into the size. And then from here, you'll now see that I can rearrange it even more as necessary. So you have a little bit more flexibility. It's a little bit easier than working with some of the standard dashboards that we have within the Dynamics 365 environment. So not only can I go through and can I easily rearrange the tiles that I have within my dashboards, but as I'm looking at the information, because this is considered just a dashboard, I can be able to drill down and look at the details behind the report. So if I have where top owners by active cases, you'll notice that as I hover over each one of these tiles, I also have certain actions that I can perform. Now, when I'm looking at the dashboard, I'm limited to my actions in that I can look at the focus, or I can click on that drop down arrow and I can manage the tiles by simply clicking on the More button. So from here, I can tell it that I want to pin this maybe to another dashboard. I can also be able to export the data and choose where I want to export the data to. Or if I tell it to edit the tile details, you'll see that I can actually give it a new name as far as the title and even subtitle. And then some of the other options that you can have is, again, if I don't want this tile on my dashboard, I can simply delete the tile. Now, again, in our case, if I just want to be able to have focus, I can click on that focus mode, and you'll now see that it brings that entire tile into my primary focus so that if I want to be able to look at additional information, I can. Now, the other thing I can do is if I exit out of the focus mode and I just want to look at additional details, when I'm in a dashboard and I actually highlight one of the fields to be able to drill down and look at additional details, you'll see that what that will actually do is it takes me to the underlying reports that I have. So dashboards can consist of tiles that we've created off of various reports. And then also in taking a look at this, your reports are typically created off of the different data sets. So essentially, how if you think about the logic of creating, if we were going to create new Power BI dashboards, the steps would be that we'd want to be able to look at our existing data sets. In other words, we want to look at the data to determine what we want to include on a report. Then the next step would be is we go in and we actually create the reports that we want to use. And then for anybody that we want to be able to have quick snapshots of that information or easy access to certain information on those reports, we can then create dashboards and decide which one of these that we want to be able to pin to that dashboard itself. So logically, as far as creating them, dashboards at a very high level, quick snapshot of the information we want either ourselves or other users to be able to see and analyze further. That information then stems from reports that we create within Power BI, and that information, of course, comes from the data sets that were set up when we actually use the Get Data option. So again, taking a look at it a little bit further, you'll notice that when I drill down to the report, a couple of things, just a kind of quick high-level overview, is as we talked about previously, when it comes to the reports, we do not have data limitations like we do in Excel. We don't even have as far as sizing limitations. You can go through and create these and rearrange these as you want to when you're working with the reports. Now, right now, it's not allowing me to resize it because I'm simply just viewing the report, almost like when we open up an Excel file in read only. But you'll also see that when I'm in a report, I have the ability to use my view function to resize it. I can tell it to edit the report. I can explore and drill down and look at the additional data behind the report. Or, of course, if the information has changed and I want to have the most current information, I can also use my refresh tool. Now, as far as being able to go through, and again, if I actually have this information and I'm looking at my top owner by active cases, and if I want to be able to go through and look at it, you'll notice that even when I click on one of the actual records, that the rest of these reports, or in this case, charts, will also automatically update. So now when I select total owners by active cases and I selected demo user 1, you'll now see that it gives the highlights of as far as total owners by active activities and even resolved cases. If I select Lisa, you'll now see that again, it changes and will dynamically refresh the remainder of the data that is on that particular report. So if we take a look also when it comes to reports, you'll see that you can have multiple tabs of report information as well. So for example, if I click on active cases in organization, to give you some ideas about how this is set up, You'll see that a couple of things that we have is one of the actual functions, the tile functionalities that we have when creating reports are slicers. So very similar to Excel and using slicers within the Excel functions, we can do the same thing within Power BI. So again, by example, if I go through and I have a slicer for owner, and I just want to see how Lisa's performing, I can actually click on the record for Lisa. And as I do, you'll now see that this information will dynamically, and all of the other information on that report will dynamically update. Or again, if we take a look at, on this particular one, it's subject type. So if I click on products and I filter down, you'll now see that again, the information on that report will automatically now filter down based on the slicer information. Same thing if we look at our organization performance KPIs. Again, you'll see some of these records that I have are just simply cards and just card information. But as I'm going through, and again, I select certain records, you'll now see that the card information will dynamically update. So if I looked at total resolved cases by resolved date in the last 30 days, and I select 6, you'll now see the rest of the charts that I have will dynamically update for me. If I go back and I click on my totals for all of them, I can go in and be able to look at the remaining information. Now, the other thing that we can also do is, let's say we go into another tab and we look at organization performance trends. And again, I'm looking at cases by subject, cases by queue, even cases by status. Even as far as I've got cases by first responses, SLA statuses. So you'll notice that there are quite a few predefined reports that are available for us within the system. So if I go in and I look at customer service activities, and I'm looking at activities by type, and I want to look at email. When I click on email, you'll now see that the rest of the information that is on that report dynamically updates and will refresh for me. So as we're going through and we're looking at this information, it is possible to not only, again, drill down and look at this information, but if I want to see additional details, I can also, as I actually have the record selected, I can click on view, I can click on export, and from export, I can choose to see the data. So as I now see the data, I can actually see the information that resides behind that chart. Or if I want to, I can click on see records, and when I click on see records, again, it will drill down and allow me to see the information. You'll also see that as I go through, I can change as to how I'm looking at and sorting that information as I go through and I do the drill down information. And then to go simply back to my original report, this is where I click on back to report, and it takes me back to the original report that I was looking at. So again, to kind of take a look at some of the other ones, you'll see that I even have an agent leaderboard. We took a look at some of these charts already from the dashboard. We have top owner by active cases, even active activities, resolved cases, if we have our service level agreement satisfactions being met, and even our CSAT scores. And then lastly, as a knowledge base manager, anyone who's managing the knowledge bases can also very quickly see which ones are currently in review. And I can filter by using the slicer turned on and off. I just want to see my draft ones. Or again, I want to see my status reason ones. I can simply go through and click on the slicers and have that information dynamically updated for me. So again, I can scroll back and forth and look at the various reports that I have in the tab to be able to look at the existing ones that are created as being part of the content library. Now, that does not mean that I don't have the ability to be able to create new ones, because as we talked about, I also have the data sets. So if I go down to my data sets and I click on the Dynamic CRM Online Service Manager data sets, you'll see that by default, it automatically assumes that you want to be able to go through and be able to create a new report. And so a couple of things it provides me when I click on the data sets. The first thing it does is on the right-hand side is that you'll see I have the ability to view any of my record types that might be related to my or my service module. So you'll see that I've got my case information. And not only that, but as I expand on those record types, not only do I have the standard fields that we're used to seeing within our service module, but you'll also notice that they even have calculated fields, such as actual service units, actual duration in minutes. So again, I can do deep analysis when I'm looking at case management. And as we already looked at, we have our CSAT percentage and even our CSAT scores. I can take a look at some of these other ones, such as escalated case percentage, incident stage code, number of child incidences, and again, even some of these predefined ones that we have based on dates, so that we can have some out-of-the-box analysis fields that we can use when creating new reports. So you'll notice I can not only use the standard resolve by, but I can even have a resolved by SLA status. I can have when it's resolved, or when it's resolved on by month, the month value, in other words, by the actual month description, by the number being 1 through 12, or being able to break it down by year, year value, and so on. And then again, if I continue to scroll down, you'll even notice I've got a calculation there for SLA met percentage. So not only do we actually have some of the standard fields available with these record types, but we even have some predefined calculated fields and formulas that have been created for us. And again, some of these other record types that we're probably used to seeing and working with from the service module is where we have queues and queue items. If you'll remember, the queue items are what are created when we take a case and we move it, or case or activity, and we move it into a queue. So we can do further analysis as far as our queue items that are residing within our different queues in the Dynamics 365 environment. I even have user details. And then of course you'll see that I also have my knowledge base and knowledge base information. And even as far as the review hierarchy. So again, depending on how we're managing and if we're using the knowledge base, I can even see that review hierarchy and have that as being an option to put that into the report itself. And then of course we also have contact, and you'll notice with contact, I have my city, my country, latitude, longitude, primary account ID, and then of course customer. And if you remember, Dynamics 365 considers a customer to be either an account or a contact. Whereas if I go in and I look at my account record, that again, you'll see that I have certain fields that I can use, but I don't have all of the predefined fields. Now, this is also saying that we do not necessarily just have to use these data sets. It is possible to go in and be able to create custom data sets and pull in data sets from other environments as well that you can use to be able to build your reports. Now, the second thing that you'll also see as far as when we go in and we tell it to create a new report is I also have the available visualizations. And when it comes to both of the tools, you'll see that I do have a show hide pane to where with my fields, I can tell it to show the fields or hide the fields. So it depends on how I'm focusing or what I'm focusing on when I'm building the report itself. But again, taking a look at some of the visualizations, these are how do I want to represent the data on my report. So again, you'll see that we have a lot of the same similar charts that we have when creating charts in the Dynamics 365 environment. But if you look a little bit further and you go a little bit deeper, you'll see that we actually have some additional chart types that we can use. And not only do we have additional chart types such as a scatter chart or even a waterfall chart, but we even have different types of tiles such as a tree map or even a map. And you'll notice that we actually have two different types of maps. We have a regular map, and then we have a filed map. And then we have a various table types, so I can actually have a table or I can have a matrix. And of course we have our funnel chart, our gauge chart, and then some of the other ones that we have is the multi-row, card, and even KPIs. And then as I mentioned previously, you'll even see that we have the options for slicers. Now, to take a look at how we can create some custom reports as necessary, again, the most important thing when it comes to developing a report is to determine what information do I want to look at? So again, if it's something that I want to be able to go through and I want to be able to look at cases in an SLA warning state. In other words, I want to see if I've got any cases that are either have reached a non-compliant state or nearing non-compliant state. I can go through and where some of my information is going to be pulled from the different record types. So there's going to be some information pulled from my case, some information pulled from my contact, as well as some information even from my user account. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with the case. Again, I'm going to expand my record type. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in both my ticket number and the tile. So you'll notice I don't even have to drag those fields onto the report. As soon as I check the box of the fields I want to use, it will automatically add and determine what would be the best visualization based on the data type of that field. So in this scenario, they determined that being able to pull in a table would be the best option used. And in this case, I agree because that's how I want to look at my information. So not only can I go in and again, do I want to be able to have the case details as to the case number and the title, but I want to know who's currently owning the case. Now, you will see that if I scroll up here, you'll notice that there is a field in my case record type called owning user ID. But notice if I select that one, the value that I'm looking at, because it's actually pulling the information from the SQL databases, the value that I'm going to see is going to be the GUID information. But that's not going to be very helpful for me. So this goes back to, again, being able to link the appropriate fields. I can go in and I can select user and I can tell it that I want to look at the owner record, and it then knows how to be able to link those two fields together when building the report. Now, the other thing I can also do is, let's say, obviously, I want to know that I now have my case details. I know who owns those cases, but I want to be able to know, okay, well, what customers are we not meeting the compliancy on? So this might be where I go to my contact, and from my contact, I might want to be able to choose both customer, and let's also say I want to pull in city because I want to see what location they currently reside in as well. So now that I have that, you'll see that it builds that table for me. And once I have the table built, the other thing it also does is with the visualizations, it'll show me the fields where I can actually go through and set up certain filters and be able to have certain types of filters as necessary. I can also go in and I can format the table. And I can decide whether or not I want to have the tile being turned on or off, whether or not I want to have a background turned on or off. And so when I go through and if I choose to tile the text, I can say tile it on, and then I might give it a title. So I might call this one Cases in SLA Warning State. And then if I wanted to, I can also change the font color. And you'll see that as I'm changing it, I can see the results of it directly within that table. So if I want to change the alignment, and let's say I want to resize that, make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bit easier to see. And then I can even choose column formatting. So if I want to be able to have different colors, I can be able to go through and turn on colors. I can have different fonts as necessary. And then I can do it as far as having a different one, let's say for each owner. So not only do you actually have the ability of setting up visual filters. So again, let's say with the visual filter, for example, I might just want to see all of those that are not hitting compliant for the last 30 days. So the nice thing about this is instead of me having to figure out how to calculate this, is that I can come in here and you'll see that I even have a date record type. And some of the standard date record types that I have available are some regular calculations that we might use on a regular basis. For example, you'll see that I might have is current fiscal month, quarter, even year. Or in this case, let's say I just want it to be for, let's say, the last 30 days. So to be able to pull in additional filters, I can come in here and drag and include that as being my visual filter. And then I can determine as far as what kind of filtering that I want to be able to do. So if I want to be able to have a top 10 value, or if I want to do basic filtering, I can come in and say, is it for the last 30 days? To tell it to show just for the last 30 days, I could mark the checkbox to equal true, and you'll now see that the information within that table is dynamically updated. I can also, if I don't want to do it at the visual level with just this one tile, I can also determine to be able to put it at the page level or even put it at the report level so that anything on that report, if I change it in another tile, it will automatically update this information as well. So let's say that we're going to do one more. And let's say I also want to be able to have, let's say, cases by city. So again, in this case, we are going to go back to my case record type. And to be able to create a new tile, you'll see that all I have to do is click in any of the blank area that I have on my report. And it will now allow me to put a new tile on the report itself. So from here, I can go back to case. And really, all I want to be able to do is I want to be able to pull in the total number of active cases. So again, I can scroll down. You'll see I've got a multitude of calculated fields. So you'll see I've got cases, total active cases by date, total number of active cases, total number of all cases, escalated cases, resolved cases, and total resolved cases by date. So again, if I just want to pull in total number of active cases, I can take this field and I can just drag it onto my report. And again, you'll see as soon as I drag it onto the report that it immediately thinks, based on the data type being a number, that you want to be able to have some kind of chart. Now, again, on this particular situation, I don't necessarily want to be able to have a chart. I might want to be able to have it as, let's say, for example, we have it as a map. So I can click on the map icon, and as soon as I click on the map icon, you'll see that by changing the visualization, the options that I have available with my filters are going to change. So you'll now see that I can actually have my location, a legend, a latitude, longitude, and that's also where, when we get into the latitude and longitudes, that when we look at some of these other records, such as our contact, where we have latitude and longitudes. So now if I want to be able to go through and I want to be able to use this, this is where I can go through, and on my city, I can tell it that I want to be able to have that as my legend. And you'll now see that it creates a legend for me. And if I want to, I can also include the country. So let's say, as far as my location, I do want it to be my city. And I'm also going to add location to my country. So as soon as I now add those, you'll now see that the map itself will change. And then I'm also going to have and put in, as far as a legend, we're going to do the legend as being my city. So now, again, if you'll think about this, and when I'm looking at this information, you'll see that as I add in the map, that each one of these tiles are going to have certain functionality based on the tile type itself. So when I go to my map tile, and again, to be able to drill down and look at more information, I can simply just use my mouse, and by scrolling in, I can now come through and scroll down and be able to drill down all the way down to streets as necessary. So again, from here, if I want to drill down a little bit more and be able to see that information, you'll notice that I can now hover over that particular city and it'll give me the total number of cases. And then of course, if we go over, which again, I'm going to scroll out, because most of our cases that we are currently working on, again, my scroll bar is a little quick to want to go through. Let's see if we can do this again. So if we look at this, we'll see that most of our cases are actually based in the Washington area. But again, I can scroll down and now be able to see, because I have a tile up there and I have my legends, I can now see additional information. And as I need to, you'll see that I can tell it to go to the next level of the hierarchy and drill down even further, so that it allows me to, instead of having to just do a lot of scrolling, I can scroll down and look at the various levels of the hierarchy. Or again, I can go back up and be able to navigate as necessary. Now, it's also where, if you look at some of the options that we have, is I still have the ability to do certain filters. So if I just want to be able to look at, and if you remember, one of the fields that we have on here was my total number of active cases. So that's all the current active cases. If I wanted to be able to see it just for the last 7 days, again, I want to filter it down even further, then this is where I could come in and be able to show the total number of active cases in the last 7 days. But let's be able to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and let's say that we have total number of active cases. So I want to be able to see that number as well as have the option of drilling down. So again, I'm going to take that field, drag it onto my report, and of course, by default, it's going to want to create a chart for me. And you'll see that when it comes to clicking and dragging, that I have and can make this as large as I need to be able to better represent my report. But again, I don't want it to necessarily be a chart. On this one, I just wanted to see the value. So this might be where I use my card. So on my card, you'll now see that it will give me total number of active cases. But again, let's say that I just want to see total number of active cases in the last 7 days. So this might be where I can come in with my visual filters, drag it over to where it's saying is the last 7 days, and we'll let it load. And that's again where I could go in and choose yes or no. The other nice thing is, for any reason, if I decide I don't want that filter anymore, I can easily delete the filter just by clicking on the X and be able to delete it. Now, let's also say that I want to be able to have a slicer. So again, as I'm looking at this information, I can now get it nice and resized. With the card, let's say I don't need it to be that big, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And I'm going to pull it in here again, except this time again, I'm going to make it a card. But this time, once we have the card, I am going to actually have it filter where it is. Let's see if we'll let the filter pull this time. Nope, doesn't seem to like that. So we're going to remove that card. Essentially though, let's say that I also want to be able to filter this by priority, by case priority, or even by origin. So I can still pull in some of these other fields. Like, so for example, I want to pull in my case priority. So I can scroll down, find my priority field. And again, you'll notice all I do is once I click on it, it's now going to go through and it's going to determine how I'm going to look at that information. But let's say I want to use that as a slicer. So this is again where I can simply have the record highlighted. Nope, let's see if we can have it highlighted again. Try that one more time. Have that field highlighted, change the visualization, and now as soon as I change the visualization, you'll now see that I can move that where I want it to go. And I'm going to make that just a little bit smaller. And then the other one I want to be able to have is my case origin. So I'm going to add that to my field. And then we're going to do the same thing, is I'm going to actually make sure that that is selected. I'm going to turn that into my slicer. And we're going to resize it as necessary. So now, as I go through and I click on, let's say I click on email. As I go through and I click on email, you'll now see that all of the records and all of the underlying data that is actually on that report will be dynamically updated as I go through and I click on the various slicers. So automatically, as it goes through, by having to be able to build these reports, you can have dynamic analyzed data very quickly and very easily. If I wanted to, you'll also see that, let's say, for example, I'm going to move this down a little bit, and we'll move that down a little bit. If I wanted to, I can even in here tell it that I want to include a text box. And so I might just say, however I want it to be, so case analysis by city. Again, I can choose as far as whatever font that I want to be able to use. If I want to bold it, I want to make it larger, have it center aligned, and then once I do that, as necessary, I might have this as being my report title. And not only can I have my report title, but again, as we talked about, I can even pull in different shapes. So I can make it a little bit more presentable of a true report. And then even from here, once I have this done, again, it's as if I'm creating a new report. So you'll notice that some of the other options that I have in my command bar is I have the ability to duplicate this page. So if I want to have something similar but not have it completely the same, I can duplicate it and then be able to build off of this to create a new report. I also have the ability to save this report. And then even from here, I have the ability to directly analyze this information even further within Excel. So let's say I'm going to save this, and I'm just going to call this case analysis by city, and I'm going to save it. Now, once it's been saved, you'll see that as we talked about that down here we have multiple pages. So again, if it's something that I want to be able to have multiple pages of reports, I could easily click on page 2 and create another one. On page 1, I can rename this and call this one whatever name I need to be able to call it. And then again, as I make the changes, I can save it, make sure it's updated, and it will now be saved. You'll also see that from here, I can export this to PowerPoint. I can publish this to the web to be able to have it as public access for anyone to be able to look at this. I can do a save as to create another report as necessary. But then also, what it will do, or what it should do, is that once we actually have that report created, is it will go through and actually update under the reports and allow me to see that report itself. So again, I'm just going to save this, make sure it's been saved, and let's see if we can go through. So here's another example that we actually had that I created that was very similar to it. We have total number of cases by owner, cases in the SLA warning state, again, even having it by city. Well, once we have this and we have this set up and we have the report set up, again, a couple of options that I have. If I determine that I now want to build a dashboard off of this report, this goes back to I can use the pin visual and I can now tell it where do I want to pin this. So I can choose an existing dashboard if I have one out there, or I can create a new one. And then once I pin it, you'll now see that I now have a new dashboard, and that particular tile from the report is now pinned to that dashboard. And that anytime when you have new ones, so now you'll see, here's my new report. And again, what's nice about this is that I can pin these tiles from various reports into a single dashboard. So if I want to have total active number of cases, again, I can click on the pin icon, tell it that I want to pin it to an existing dashboard, click on pin, and you'll now see that even though they're actually located on two different reports, they're still being pinned to the same dashboard. And even within that dashboard, I can come in, I can resize them as necessary, and I can rearrange them to make the necessary modifications. What's also nice is that from here, if I want to be able to add a tile, I can just do it right from the dashboard, and I have the ability to add a tile using various medias. So if I want to be able to have an image or logo that I want to be able to have, or even real-time data, I can add tiles directly from the dashboard. I can make this dashboard a favorite. So if there's multiple ones that we have out here, I can turn this into a favorite by simply just clicking the star, and it will then show all of my favorites that I currently have out there. And then the other thing you can do is if I now want to be able to have other people access this particular dashboard, I have the ability to share it. And I can decide as to who has, and I can see who has access to the current dashboard, or if I want to share it with someone else, again, as long as they're within your organization, I can actually give them their information and then even put a message as to what information or what they're going to be looking at and how to be able to use the dashboard directly from here. So when it comes to working with the Power BI environment, again, it's a very, very extensive reporting application that does not necessarily limit you to be able to look at the existing CRM or Dynamics 365 environment, because you can go out there and you can connect to multiple data sources to be able to provide some very feature-rich reports as part of the Dynamics 365 environment.
In addition to reporting on and analyzing the information contained within the application, goal management features can be used to establish and track progress against any target values for key performance indicators. For service management, these might include the number of cases we resolve or the time in which they are resolved. Within the goal management area, there are a number of key record types and terms that are necessary to understand before we start creating goals. First, we have goal metrics. A goal metric is a mechanism, and it's a record type that allows a user to define how the goal is going to be measured. Every goal record is based on an underlying goal metric record and a metric type of either amount or count, such as the average amount charged to the customer per case or the count of cases that are currently set to high priority status. The selection of the goal metric determines how the actual and in-progress goals are calculated. Within Microsoft Dynamics 365, there are several predefined goal metric records used to base goals and to configure goal metrics. These include number of cases. Number of cases are used strictly for the service module and works with the case record. Then we also have number of product units. Now this goal is related to the quantity of opportunity products included in open or won opportunities within a time period. And then we also have revenue. Now this is where you'd create goals dealing with revenue. And typically, this metric is normally used for salespeople. The second key component of goal management is establishing a goal target. In other words, what is it you're looking to accomplish? The goal target is a specific value of a goal metric entered for a particular time period, such as month, quarter, or even year. During the course of the time period defined for a goal, actual and in-progress values are regularly calculated. These calculated values are used to compare the target value of the goal with what has already been achieved and what is remaining to be achieved for the time period. You also have goal owners. Goals can be assigned to users or teams, so every goal is assigned to an owner. You also have parent goals, and in some situations, organizations might choose to use parent goals. Parent goals can combine multiple goals to equal one large one. For example, A customer service manager has a team of 5 people. Each customer service representative that reports to this manager is responsible for closing 100 cases a week. This means that the team manager's goal is 500 cases a week. So in this example, the team manager's goal would really be a parent goal. How he or she is doing in terms of managing the team is reflected upon how each individual is performing against their individual goals. Lastly, we also have roll-up queries. Roll-up queries help fine-tune the data sets that we're actually analyzing and more closely articulating the actual records we're counting towards our goals. In other words, it's one thing to count the total number of records that are resolved, but what if we want to only count those cases which are tied to specific products or cases resolved for customers for a certain geography? Roll-up queries allow us to fine-tune that data that's being analyzed. Goals differ from goal metrics, as goals are always based off of a time period with a target value. Goal records are also made up of 3 numeric values that can be used together to track progress against goals. Those 3 values are target values, which are manually entered by the user and are really what the goal is. And then you have actual values. Actual values are calculated and defined by the actual roll-up field specified in the underlying goal metrics. In other words, how are we doing relative to the target goal? And then we also have in-progress values. These values are calculated and defined by the in-progress roll-up field, also specified in the underlying goal metrics or in the potential records that could be counted towards our actual target. Every goal record is based upon an underlying goal metric record with a metric type of either amount or count. The selection of the goal metric determines how the actual and in-progress are calculated. Many goals track both an actual value and an in-progress value against a target. For example, a service representative might have a goal of how many cases they close within a certain month or the time it takes to resolve those cases. Goal records are not required to include both actual and in-progress calculated fields. Goals are always constructed around a time period of some sort with a target value. For example, Janet's goal is to close 50 cases this month, with a target value being 50 and the time period of being 1 month. Additionally, you have a roll-up field. Now, a roll-up field is a field that contains calculated fields for the actual and in-progress values. The criteria specified in the goal and the goal metric fields, along with the owners of the underlying records, determine which records are included in the calculation of a goal's target and in-progress fields.
All right, so now that we talked about the concept of goal management and some of the components that make up goal management within the Dynamics 365 environment, let's go into the system and see how we can create new goals for our customer service representatives, as well as how to be able to go in and review goal metrics and be able to create new goal metrics as necessary. So we're back in the system, and to be able to go in and look at the components that make up creating goals within the Dynamics 365 environment, this is again where we can go under Service, and then from the Service module, you'll see that there's actually a section related to our goals. And as we talked about, that all goals that are created within Dynamics 365 all have goal metrics. And again, a goal metric is that mechanism or that record type that defines on how the goal is going to be measured. And again, by default, every goal record is going to be based on an underlying goal metric. So going through, and also as we mentioned, if I click on goal metrics, out of the box, Dynamics 365 has some predefined goal metrics already created. And as we mentioned, there is one specific for related to the sales module or the service module, and that is number of cases. So let's just go in and kind of look at how the goal metrics are set up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the number of cases metric. Again, when it comes to setting up the metric itself, as a reminder, again, what we are doing is we are defining how that goal is going to be measured. So, of course, when we're dealing with customer service, the primary type of measurement is going to be related to cases. And typically, it's going to be related to cases and having them resolved. So, you'll notice that I can give it a name. And again, we're not restricted, it is a required field. And then the second required field is what type of metrics. Are we doing this based on an amount, whether it be a dollar amount or an integer or even a custom amount, or are we doing it by count? Now, when I go through and I actually choose amount, I can choose the amount data type, whether it is dealing with currency, integers, or another very decimal type of an amount as necessary. And then also, once I go through and I define how that goal is going to be measured, whether it's counting the number of records or it's based on an amount value, whether it is a number of hours or time necessary to complete the cases. Or again, like we're talking about from the sales side of it, obviously the amount of revenue produced over a certain time period. Those are all examples of where you might use amount over count. But of course, for us, our goal is to count the number of resolved records. So once we have that identified, then the most important step is to define the roll-up fields. And again, the roll-up fields are what are the actual records that I need to track? And that being, in this case, how many resolved cases do we want to track? Another example might be if we're dealing with in progress is how many active cases do I currently have out there that could potentially be resolved within our time period? Because again, if you'll remember, when it comes to creating goals, all goals are constructed around a specific time period. So again, in looking at this, I can go in and we'll take a look at our current roll-up field, which is our actual. So to review the roll-up fields, this is where I can double click on the roll-up field itself, and you'll see that I have the ability to be able to identify the source type and then choose the actual state. And even from that state, I can even be more specific and give it the status reason. So if you remember, when it comes to resolved cases, when we actually tell it to resolve a case, it creates a resolution activity. And as part of that resolution activity, we can provide a status reason of, did we provide information or did we solve the problem? Now in this scenario, we don't want it to do either. We want it to do it for both. So we don't want to be specific and filter down that criteria even further. Then the last thing that you'll see as far as step number 3 that we have is specifying what the date field is to determine when it should roll up and considered to be resolved. And as we just mentioned a second ago, that by default, all goals are always constructed around a time period. So basically saying what field on my case record should be evaluated to determine whether or not it's going to fall within the current time period that I specified when creating the goal. So again, if we have quarterly goals, when I go through and this is closed, when it's closed, the last modified on date gets updated. So by default, it would have now considered that particular case, that resolved case, to be within my quarterly goal. Now, the other thing you can do is when you're actually working on the goal metrics, not only can I have actuals being tracked, but I can also have in progress being tracked. So if I wanted to, instead of having to go in and create a new goal metric, I would have the ability, as necessary, to be able to go in and add additional roll-up fields. So right now, we only have a roll-up field for my actual. But I can, if I wanted to, I can click down into that roll-up field subgrid. And when I do, you'll now see that I have another tab available other than my goal metric tab. When I click in the subgrid, you'll see that a new tab comes up and is available for my roll-up fields. So from here, if I wanted to create a new one to measure anything that's in progress, so that users can go in and be able to track, well, what we have as being actual resolved cases versus in progress active cases. I can go in and also set up additional roll-up fields as necessary. So I can click on Add New Roll-Up Field, and then from here, to kind of show you what it looks like to create a new one, in that roll-up field, you'll notice that you have the three options, whether it's going to be the in progress or it's actuals. And once I use the actuals, you'll see it's no longer an option for that particular metric. Now, once I choose that roll-up field, as we talked about, again, you're not limited to just dealing with cases. You can use goals and be able to set up goal metrics for any entity type that you have within the Dynamics 365 environment. What you do want to make sure of, though, is that if you are using the roll-up records, that we want to be consistent with that record type. So if I'm using cases for one of my roll-up fields, I want to make sure that I use cases for all of the roll-up fields as necessary. So from here, once I choose case, again, this is where I can say I want to track for in progress, I want to track any active case. And then as we looked at as far as with the resolved cases, I can filter it down even further and say I only want to do it for where the status reason is set to being in progress. I may not want it to count for on hold or waiting for details or even researching. Now, again, in this scenario and then in this example, I'm going to go ahead and just leave that blank. And then as we talked about before, again, I need to define as to what field should be tracked as to being rolled up into my goal. And of course, we want to be able to, and this is where we might want to look at not only as far as last modified on, but maybe we want to look at created on. Because again, it may not be closed yet, but it was created on within this quarter, within this month, or within this week, versus modified. So I may have created it a month ago, but I have not modified it since then, but I still want that to be counted towards my goal. So I can specify that date field, and once I specify the date field, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on Save and Close. And so you'll now see that I actually have two different roll-up fields available, the in progress and the actual. So once I have all of the roll-up fields that I want to evaluate against my metric, then this is where I can save and close the metric. And then once we have that metric created, then the next step is to go in and start creating our goals. So this is again where we go back to our module selector. We can go under service, and then from service, we can choose goals. Now, by default, when we select our goals, you'll notice the default view that comes up is my goal or my goals for this period. But just like with any other record types, there are a variety of views available to help better manage the goal record types. So if I click on the drop-down arrow, you'll see I can look at my group's case goals or the goals for this quarter versus the revenue goals. So again, this kind of aligns to what we talked about with the default goal metrics available within Dynamics 365 being cases, products, and revenue. But I also can look at my active goals. And if I click on my active goals, you'll see that I actually do have some goals out there back from 2013 that have not been closed yet. Or if I want to look at the goals for the current active goals for all of the users, I can choose active goals for all the users and be able to see all of them that are currently set to active. Or even as far as if I have any closed goals. So again, once they're completed and that time period has finished, we actually have the ability of going through and closing those goals so that we can better manage of each quarter, each year, each month, however we're tracking those goals, and be able to have them closed and just work on our current active goals. So in looking at this, let's say I do want to go in, I want to create some new goals. So to be able to create a new goal, you'll notice that, like the command bar, very similar to other record types, is that when I'm in that view, I have multiple actions that I can perform within that view itself. And of course, one of the ones is the ability to create new goals. So we're going to click on the new action button. And when we click on the new action button, this is now where it pulls up the goal form. And I can now start defining what the values of the true values are going to be, what my target values are going to be, as well as what the time period is that I want to use based on that target value. So in looking at this, you'll see that you do have several predefined fields or required fields. The required fields might be my name, and then of course, who's going to own that actual goal, my goal metric, and then as we talked about, since our time is all constructed, or goals are all constructed around a time period, you'll see that that is also considered required fields. But again, we can actually have them pre-populated using our fiscal period setup. Now, there's some additional information, and we'll talk about as we get into creating this goal, such as child goals and reviewing the actuals and even different goal criteria. But for now, to be able to go in and just create a goal, I'm going to give it a name. And if you think about it, if we actually are dealing with our customer service representatives, and let's say that we do have quarterly goals that we're using, and I have 25 different customer service representatives. That being said, I probably want to think about a logical naming convention when I'm creating the goals, so that if I want to be able to write some reports, set up any type of analytical review on them, that they're consistent in the sorting of those records themselves. So in this example, let's say I might want to do this as being my 2016 Q4, and then who the goal is for. And I might even want to put on here, let's say Q4, the user's name, and then what kind of goal it is. So let's say that I'm going to have this as being my service goals. Now, once I give it a name, then I can also go in and select the goal metrics. So as we talked about, that we can see that we have our predefined metrics. And again, if you remember, with the number of cases, I'm going to go ahead and drill back and remind, or to look at what we had as far as the metric. So with that metric, I am simply measuring the total number or the count of records that are both actual being resolved cases, and then anything is being in progress of active cases. Now, as we also said, that the goal owner, when it comes to the goal owner, you also have to have an owner that you're using. And so I can come in here and I can tell it to look up more records. And again, as we mentioned, that when it comes to the goals owners themselves, it is not just limited to the user, it can be both user or a specific team. Now, in our case, we are going to go ahead and we're going to have it as being users. And I'm going to go ahead and just select myself as being that goal owner. Now, once we've determined the metric and who this goal is for, I can also specify a manager. So again, if this is something to where we might have a different manager or my manager who I roll up to, this is going to become important when we start talking about parent and child goals. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But as we mentioned, as far as when it comes to parent goals, there might be those situations where you want to combine multiple goals to equal one large one. So it might be that if I am the customer service manager and I have 5 customer service representatives underneath me, that my results and my goal results are going to be based on the performance of my team, not necessarily the number of total cases I closed, but the total cases that my team has closed. Or again, the time that it took for those cases to be closed, that's what I'm going to be measured against. So once we've determined as far as my owner and even the manager, the next thing that we'll look at is the time period. And again, by default, we do actually have the fiscal periods that can be set up that we've discussed in previous lessons. And we can go through and we can determine what kind of time period that we want to look at. So you'll see that, again, I can do this on a quarterly basis, which is the standard default, or I can even do this on a custom period. So let's say that I want to be able to do it for just a single month. Or in a situation, let's say I have a new customer service representative that was just hired, and so I only want to track the total count of goals starting from today through the end of the year. So it might be something to where I can go through and actually change as to when that goal is going to be tracked for. Now, again, we're going to keep this simple and we're going to just go back to our fiscal period and we'll use our current period and year that we want to be able to track this against. So once I've defined the time period of when these goals are going to be measured against, then the next thing and the most important thing is to define what's my target. In other words, what is considered the goal achieved. And in this situation, it might be that they need to be able to resolve 120 cases in a single quarter. And again, that's all just going to be dependent upon your organization's structure of what's considered an achievable goal. Now, once I've defined my target at this point, before I can go in and configure any other information related to the goals, like other record types within the system, I want to be able to save the record to make additional modifications. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Save icon. And when I click on the Save icon, you'll now see that if I want to, I can click down into the child goals and I could be able to go through and set up additional child goals as necessary. More importantly though, if I can continue to scroll down, you'll see that I can now have additional information regarding my actuals. Now, when it comes to working with those actuals, out of the box by default, that the system will go through and automatically calculate what the actual numbers are going to be on a periodic basis. But if we want to be able to go through and we want to force the calculation to happen, we can also do that. So, and again, in setting this up, if I want to be able to go through and see what my actuals are instead of waiting for the system to calculate it, this is where you'll see that in my command bar, again, I've got multiple actions that I can perform against this goal record. And one of them being is the recalculate button. So if I click on the recalculate action, you'll notice that depending on the goals and what the goal criteria is, it's saying it might take some time because again, it's going to have to evaluate every record that we have in the system. So if I've got thousands of cases that are open right now, or thousands of cases that are resolved, it has to evaluate them against that current time period. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And once I click on OK, it's going to go through and it's going to do a recalculate. And so now when I scroll down, you'll now see that it lets me know when the last time the roll-up has occurred. Now again, I want to emphasize that this is done automatically on a regular basis within the Dynamics 365 environment. But you have the ability to manually force it to recalculate as necessary. And you'll see that now when I clicked on recalculate, it's letting me know I've got 12 actual resolved cases and I've got 20 other active cases that could potentially be resolved by the end of this quarter. Now, what's also nice about this is that when I have the actual information and the details, I have the ability of being able to review the underlying records that make up those numbers. So if I want to, under the participating records over on the left-hand side of my navigation pane, I can click on In Progress, and what it will now do is it will show all of the cases that are currently set to active but could potentially close within this quarter. And then same thing if I go to my actuals, which again, if you remember, the actuals that we had was 12. So if I go through, and again, I can now look at my resolved cases. And just to kind of show you, if I go under my services and I go to cases, in my active cases, you'll see that I have 20. And if I go to my resolved cases, you'll see that I have 12. And also, not only that, but if I go to my active cases, and let's say that I want to be able to close one of the active cases. So let's say that I'm going to go to my system lockup case, and I'm now ready to close it. So I'm actually going to change the product on this. Oh, let's try that again. And I'm actually going to associate a product to this, being my tablet M200. And before I resolve the case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure it's saved. And then I'm going to click on Resolve Case. Again, that we talked about the status reason being as far as the type. I can give it a solution. And then I can give it the appropriate billable time. So again, let's say I put this as being 26 minutes. And I'm going to mark that as being resolved. Okay. So now status is set to being resolved. If I go back to my goal, which I still have open, so if I go back to my goal record and I come back in, and let's say I just go back to my targets and I look at my actuals, if I now go back in and I click on recalculate, you'll now see that they updated. And not only did they update it, but if I go to my actuals in the participating records, you'll now see that it actually recorded that in the actual record. And then I can see my in progress as well. So not only does it give us the ability to go through and again, update that and be able to track that, but as we looked at even some of the dashboards, that we have the ability to have that as being a chart that we can track against to see where we are in the progression of our goals. Now, some of the other options that we have when it comes to working with the goals, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save my record before we do anything else, is we have the ability to have child goals as well as additional roll-up queries. So let's say that now I've created the goal for myself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close out of here, and we're going to go back to our service module, and we're going to go back to goals. So you'll see that as I created this, that even within the view, as we talked about, I can now see what my target is, what my percent achieved is, and even what my actual end in progress are. Now, what's also nice about this is that I do not necessarily have to go in and be able to run the recalculate from within the goal record itself. If I select that goal, just like with some of the other views that we have within the system, I can be able to manage the goal record itself or multiple goal records as necessary directly within the view. So again, from here, I can choose recalculate. If I want to be able to go in and see the updated as it continues to progress. You'll also see if I needed to close the goal, I have the ability to close the goal. So again, once the quarter is up, we're at the year end, I want to close the goal and be able to create new ones from there. And then I even have the ability to change the goal managers. But some of the other functionalities to take a look at when we're dealing with parent-child relationships when it comes to goals. So let's say I'm setting up a goal for one of my employees. So again, I'm going to go ahead and click on New. And for the name, I'm going to call this one, let's say 2016 Q4 CRM Demo User Service Goals. Now, again, in doing this, we need to make sure that the goal metric is going to be consistent with whatever we have specified as being the parent goal. So if the CRM demo user is my employee, and I have the number of cases set up as being my goal, that I need to make sure that the goal metric is going to be consistent with the goal records that we are using. Now in this case, this is also where, under my goal owner, we're going to go in and we're going to select our CRM demo user account. And then what we can do is from here, I can now come in and I can select a parent goal. So this is now where I can say the parent goal is going to be the one that I have selected. And then let's say on the target value that I'm going to have this as being, let's say 250 cases that need to be closed. So once I do that, again, I'm going to go ahead and save my record. And that as I save my record, again, I'm going to scroll down to look at the actuals. I'm going to click on recalculate so we can see what our values are. And you can see that I actually have 5 with the in progress being 16. But not only did it do that, but now if I save and close this, and again, I'm going to change my view to being active goals, you'll now see that I can actually see the goals for both CRM demo user and myself. But if I say I go back and I open up my goal, when I open up my goal record and I scroll down, you'll now see that automatically when I create those goals and I assign a parent goal against it, that it automatically will link and roll down to that child goal as necessary. Now, the other thing that we can do, and since we are in here, is the child goals also have the ability to specify certain goal criteria. So what that means is you'll also see that when I have that specified, again, I have 18 in case and I have 35 in progress. But one of the options I have available is I can tell it to roll up only goals of the child goals. So if I go in and I select yes, and again, I save this record. Now, if I go back and I'm going to click on recalculate, now when I go back and recalculate, you'll see that the only records that it is now tracking are those of the child. In other words, everything for my CRM demo user, and it's not including anything for my account. So you have the ability as far as when you're specifying that criteria that you can say if I want to roll up the goals from the child or if I want to include mine as well. And then I can also say what record sets do I want to include for the roll up. In other words, do I want to have it as being all records or just my own gold records? So if I go through and I choose all, this is also where I have the ability of creating certain roll up criteria. So in doing this, this would be an example where setting up the roll-up query for both the actual and the in progress. It might be that I want to be able to narrow down the specific records that I'm evaluating. So let's say, for example, the goal is that I have both Lisa and CRM demo user that are only working on a specific product type. They're product specialists for the Fabricam M200 tablet. So to be able to go through and not just look at all resolved cases, I only want to look at resolved cases for a specific product. This is where I can use a roll-up query to be able to filter down the records even more. And there are different ways that you can create the roll-up queries. One of the ways that we can do this is, again, we can use from the service module, right from the goals, we have the ability to have roll-up queries. So you'll notice I don't have any active roll-up queries. Now, a lot of times though, we're specifying those queries when we're in the process of developing our goals. So it goes back to when it comes to other functions within the Dynamics 365 environment, you always have more than one way to be able to perform an action. So if I wanted to, if I'm in this goal and I want to be able to create a roll-up query, I could also do that by clicking on the lookup record. I can click on look up more records. And of course, as we just saw, we don't have any existing ones, but this is where I can click on new. And now it will pull up the new roll-up query form. So I can give this a name. So I might call this one my product specific, and being the tablet M200. And then again, from here, you'll see that I can also make sure that we're going to have this consistent with whatever we're going to be building the filter off of. Then what I want to do is under, again, the entity type, I'm going to make sure that the entity type is consistent with what we have for the goal. But now what I can do is very much like using the advanced find functionality. I can use the query designer to be able to go in and filter out the records. So this is where I can now come in, and let's say I want to have it where my product is equal to, and then from here I can select the specific product that I want to be able to use. And so let's say it's the Fabricam M200. Click on add, and then what's also nice about this is to see if the logic actually pulls any records, I can click on view records. And so when I look at that, you'll see I've got 4 records that have been returned based on my query. So once I have this query created, again, I can click on save and close, and then I can select that roll-up query. And I can do the same for both the in progress and the actuals. So now if I've set up that roll-up query, notice what happens when I click on the recalculate, what's going to happen to my actual and in progress. So when I go through, and again I allow it to recalculate, you'll now see that again, it's going to go in and it's going to redefine that because it's going to be based on, let's do this one more time. There we go. So when I go through and I set up as far as the record set for roll-up and I choose all, you'll now see that depending on the options that I have selected is depending on the results of the actual and in progress that I have specified. So being able to fine-tune the criteria goals or the goal criteria is all depending on what we have selected and whether or not we want to be able to use our roll-up queries. So again, you'll now see that it will evaluate that. And then again, I can always go in and look at the participating records to see what values it's going to return for me as necessary. Okay, so once we have this done, again, I can save and close this. And as we talked about within the views, I can have my active goals, or even from here, you'll see that I can see my group's case goals for this period, my goals for this period, in other words, my group's goals, or again, if we're dealing with revenue. So I can easily filter down and look at that information. And in doing so, again, if I want to be able to manage multiple goals at the same time, you'll see that I can select the multiple records. And as we talked about, if it's now the next quarter, I can easily close those goals. Or as necessary, let's say the management changes, and from here I can even go in and change the goal owners or the goal managers as necessary. But essentially, when it comes to working with the goals and being able to track them, they can very easily be set up within the Dynamics 365 environment and be available for any of the entities to be able to track it so that we have achievable goals that can be used within the system.
Throughout this module, we took the concepts and key components that make up the customer service module in Microsoft Dynamics 365 and discovered how to work with each and every part, whether it was working with system charts or creating new dashboards to better visualize your data, or learning how to work with the service metrics and goals for cases. In this module, the objectives were to work with system charts, as well as to identify steps to creating new charts, to create additional system dashboards, also to create Power BI dashboards, and finally to work with and create goals. This finishes the Service Intelligence in Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Customer Service course. Each and every one of the service components discussed can be used differently from one organization to the next. However, when using effectively, along with the proper procedures and processes in management, organizations can service their customers better and more effectively. For this course, some of the objectives included to create knowledge-based articles and effectively search for and manage them in the knowledge management system in the Interactive Service Hub, to explore the features of the Interactive Service Hub, as well as to use various analytic tools to provide insights and learn what they can do to further improve customer service. I'm Lisa Sorensen. Thank you for viewing this course. I hope you found it to be very beneficial.